Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Through the Fire. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we're joined by a very special guest. He is a Navy chaplain, Dr. Larry Brant. How you doing today, Larry?
I'm doing well, other than the fact a little traumatized by the Virginia DMV, but other than that, I'm doing well.
Hey, that's completely understandable. I think we all have those days where we're like, I dread to go to that DMV and just sit there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So the number one question the audience is probably wondering, who is Dr. Larry Brant?
Okay. Well, Dr. Larry Brant is, he's a kid. Well, I'm not a kid anymore, but he's a guy from the Midwest, grew up in the area around St. Louis. Um, Spent my whole life in church. I'm, obviously as a Navy chaplain, you might think that. And in high school, was very active in church activities. Then felt God's call to ministry, and in college, started working toward being an associate pastor. And I thought, well, frankly, I was going to be a worship pastor my whole life. So my bachelor's degree was in music. Met my wife at my college, my alma mater, Murray State University in Western Kentucky. Met her in the marching band, if you could believe it or not. And we just celebrated 40 years together.
Nice.
And so then went to seminary, got a master's of church music, started down that road as an associate pastor for the next 25 years. And then got asked to consider to be a volunteer chaplain for the city of Lincoln, Nebraska. And so I started doing that for the next 8 years, and then eventually began to run the ministry for the city. Had 25 volunteer chaplains that I supervised and worked with, and it was kind of cool. I could walk into the office of the mayor, I could walk into the office of the police chief or the fire chief and just say, how's your day going? How can I best pray for you today? And they would pause and just kind of, they felt safe enough they could just kind of dump the good and the bad on me, and we'd pray about it, and they're in their office. And that was a real privilege to have. And then I went to a denominational training to sharpen my chaplaincy skills, and we can dive a little deeper into that later. But it was at that training that God called me to military chaplaincy. And so I had a few hurdles I had to do. I was already too old, so I had to get an age waiver. I didn't have the right degree. I had to go back to school. And I was a big boy. I weighed well over 300 pounds. So in order to be able to answer that call, I had to lose 110 pounds. And so the day after my 45th birthday, I raised my right hand and sworn in as a Navy officer. And then 2 weeks later, going to officer development school. And 5 weeks after that, going to Navy chaplain school. And then the 7 weeks, 7 weeks after that, found myself heading off to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, to be a chaplain to Marines. And then a year later, found myself on deployment and headed to Afghanistan.
Wow. That's kind of a crazy story right there when you think about it, that, hey, I just happened to just go to this training to get, to kind of work and to progress my career where I think I'm heading. And God stepped in and said, nah, I think I will take you somewhere else.
Yeah. There's the old phrase, man plans, God laughs. I think it is especially true in my case.
Yeah, I've been down that same road many times where I think I'm going one way. It's like, nope, I'm going to move you over here instead.
Yeah. And I didn't mention this. I'm also a father and grandfather. So we have 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren that we dearly, dearly love.
Nice. What types of self-doubt and obstacles did you have to overcome to get started?
Oh my gosh. So when I went to this conference, where I felt this calling to military chaplaincy, I'll be honest with you. I probably didn't go with the purest of reasons because the conference was in Hawaii. So I went to my wife and I just said, honey, this conference, it's in Hawaii. It's the week you have off from school, because at that time she was an educational sign language interpreter. So I was like, it's the week you have off from school. It's of God that we go to Hawaii. I didn't know how true that was. And so, of course, she just heard the words Hawaii and said, when are we leaving? And so we went, and it was terrific. But while I was there, I felt kind of God say, well, you came here for good training, which you're getting, for maybe a mini vacation, which you're getting, but I brought you here to radically change your life and to radically change your calling. And kind of like Moses, the story of Moses at the burning bush, he's at the burning bush. God's telling him what he's going to do, and he starts throwing out all these excuses. Well, that's exactly what I did. I felt this calling, and I'm like, God, you couldn't possibly want me to do this, and here's why. And, the first reason was I'm already too old. The cutoff to be an officer in the military is 42. I was already past that. And at the very next session I go to, they're talking about how the Navy and the Army are in desperate need of chaplains, so they're giving age waivers.
Isn't that just a nice little sign that says ha ha ha?
Exactly. And so then the next one, I didn't have the right degree. I had 2 master's degrees at that point. I had a master's of church music, and I had a master of ministry leadership. I did not have the master of divinity that the military nor my denomination wanted me to have in order to come in. Literally the next session, I understand this is 2007. So now online schools aren't a big deal. Everybody's doing it. But back then, I'm thinking, I don't want to leave, and go to school somewhere, and I'd have to find another job, and they go to the next session and says, well, we have now these online seminaries that are fully accredited that the military and our denomination are taking. And so you could stay where you're at and go back to school. And I felt God chuckling all over again.
I bet.
And so then the next time I'm like, okay, God, we've talked about the age thing. We've talked about the school thing, but I'm not anywhere I need to be to serve in the military. I mean, at that point in time, I weighed well over 300 pounds. And I heard God whisper 2 words: diet, exercise. And I was like, okay, God, if this is what you truly want me to do, I'll do it. But please, 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 can you tell my wife? Because I really don't want to. And because, we were living a good life. We loved our church. It was full of wonderful people. Southview Baptist Church in Lincoln, Nebraska. Great church. And my wife enjoyed her job in the school system. She loved her kids that she worked with. I enjoyed the volunteer ministry with the chaplaincy. My mom lived with us. Our 3 kids, were doing well. And here I was just going to uproot everything with this huge change in my call. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to have to talk to her. And I remember something my dad said, and that was, bad news doesn't age well. And so I knew we were going to have that discussion that night. So after that day, our habit when we go to a conference together is that we go to a conference that evening, we'll sit down, we'll talk about what each of us learned, what could we take back and apply. And as we're going down the hallway to our room, have you ever seen those movies where you're like walking down the hallway and all of a sudden there's this optical effect and it looks like the hallway stretches out?
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I was feeling. I was like, man, I feel like I'm walking to the gallows here, because I'm just going to rock this poor woman's world. And so we get to the room, we close the door, I turn around and I'm getting ready to tell her what's on my mind. And she just puts her finger in my face and says, I think God's calling you to military chaplaincy. And we pray to God for something and then we're shocked when he answers it, right? And that's exactly what happened. And she had felt the same thing I did. And so we sat up for a long time that night, talked about what would change, what we needed to do, how I would need to go back to school, how could we pay for that, how I would have to change and start working out and exercising and what that would take. And I remember really she ended the conversation with this comment. And she just said, if this is what God is calling us to do, how can we do anything else? And that was pretty much enough said after that. There was no refuting that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love it though that he communicated to your wife and that kind of eased your worries and self-doubt right there.
Yeah. Oh, I still had self-doubt. Trust me.
Well, I believe it.
Because we had a long road ahead of us. I had to get an age waiver. I had to get physically fit. I had to go back to school and pass classes again. And the next day we talked with our denominational folks and we told them what we were thinking, how we felt like God was calling us. And they were, they were optimistically encouraged, but they also were honest. They said, you've got some hurdles you got to do. But we'll be there with you every step of the way and we'll encourage you. So, I was working to build, that support network to encourage me through this process. And so then we went home and we told our kids and we told my mom and everybody was like, we're behind you. If you feel like this is what God's calling you to do, do it. And then I started back to school. I found an online seminary that was fully accredited that both the military and my denomination would accept. And I started going to school. And then that Christmas, my wife bought me hours with a personal trainer at our gym. And I still like to say that she tried to pay a 22-year-old to kill me because it definitely felt that way at the beginning. And I remember I took him what I needed to do in order to be able to get in physically. And he developed a program to get me there. And we started working the program. And I remember he would have me run for 2 minutes on the treadmill and walk for 2 minutes on the treadmill. Or as I would like to say, he would have me run for 2 minutes on the treadmill, and then I would pray for Jesus to take me for 2 minutes. Or it sure did feel that way. But, and don't get me wrong, that 18 months was not easy. It was a struggle. There were times where my weight plateaued and I was ready to give up. And my wife would say, did God call you to do this or not? And if he did, turn your hiney around and get it back to the gym. And let's tweak whatever we need to tweak so that you can start losing again. And so it took 18 months. And I got my master's degree, my Master of Divinity. I got an age waiver through the Navy and I lost 110 pounds. And so the day after my 45th birthday, I raised my right hand and was sworn in as a Navy officer. And that was almost 17 years ago.
Nice. What type of training did you have to go through in the Navy to become a chaplain?
Great question. So, because a chaplain is already someone who has to establish himself before coming into the Navy. So you have to have a master's degree with at least 72 hours in religious training. And my Master of Divinity was a 90-hour master's degree. And then you have to have at least 2 years of some type of full-time ministry. And of course, I had 25 years of full-time ministry, so that was pretty easy for them to wave in. And, you have to be endorsed by a recognized body, by the Department of Defense, or now as it's called, the Department of War. So I'm Southern Baptist, so my denomination had to officially endorse me and say, yes, we approve him as a chaplain in our name to go into the Navy. And so those are really the three biggest things. And then you obviously have to pass the physical requirements to come in. And at that time, it's a little different now, but at that time, you had to weigh a particular amount for your height. You had to be able to do a 1.5 mile run within a certain time period, as many sit-ups that you can do in 2 minutes, and as many push-ups as you can do in 2 minutes. Now that's changed a little bit now, especially with some of the new things that have come out. But that's what I had to do back then. And then you had to go before a board in Washington, D.C. Now the boards are all virtual, but back then I had to fly to Washington, D.C. and actually be interviewed by a board of chaplains and line officers to convince them that I was a good fit for the United States Navy.
Nice. So it's a lot of work that you had to put in extra than just what you had to do before.
Right. And every step of the way, something shuts you down.
Yeah, usually he does, doesn't it? When God's in control, he lets it just so that doubt and creeps in a little bit more, and he's like, "Come on."
and also, to place that trust in him. And how do I want to say this? You put in the work, you trust in him, but you don't rest on your laurels.
Yeah. You mentioned you went to the wars, to a war zone in Afghanistan. Did you go? Were you deployed anywhere else where there was combat?
No, I've deployed 3 times, but that was the only combat deployment that I've had.
Okay. What did that environment show you about war and soldiers?
Well, first of all, it was Marines, which are better. So if you're Army, I'm sorry. But it showed me that I had the privilege to work with the best people on earth. It showed me that our country is worth defending. And it showed me a lot about myself. There were some things about myself I wasn't sure about. Because to be honest with you, at the beginning of this deployment, we weren't even supposed to go to combat. We were supposed to go on what's called a MU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit. And a Marine Expeditionary Unit is where about 2,500 Marines load up on 3 Navy ships, and they deploy around the world, and they do joint training with allied countries. And then we're the president's 911 in emergency in particular areas of the world. And so we were doing that. And we were actually 3 months into a MU deployment when that's when General Petraeus decided to do the surge in Afghanistan at the beginning of 2011. And so we were actually pulled off our ships and flown into Afghanistan and told that we were now going to go into combat for 6 months. So I found out right after Thanksgiving of 2010 that we were going to be going into Afghanistan. But I delayed telling my wife until after Christmas because I did not want to ruin my family's Christmas. I mean, I was already going to be gone, always going to be deployed. I did not want to ruin that. And then, the day after Christmas, I had that very difficult phone call with my wife to tell her that we were being redirected into Afghanistan for 6 months of combat. And we were going to be, I was with an infantry battalion, so we were going to be on the front lines.
Yeah. I bet that didn't go over too well. I mean, caused a little bit more fear and everything in your relationship.
It was a very difficult conversation. I'll be honest with you, she was great. She didn't break down with me on the phone. She waited until after I hung up to shed her tears. And of course, she was very supportive. But I didn't know what to expect. We had trained to go for a MEU, and then we were told we were going into combat. So we were flown into Kuwait and basically did a couple, 3 months of pre-combat training in 3 weeks, and then sent into the fight.
Yeah, so that was probably a different experience than what you were kind of expecting too.
Very much so. Very much so. But at the same time, it was also my job to be there for the Marines when, they were going through the same struggles I was. They thought, I'm going on this MEU deployment, I'm not going into combat, because some of them had already been in combat already. And then they find out they're going back into combat. And so they had to have those same conversations with their loved ones, with their spouses, with their families, their boyfriends, girlfriends. And then they were also coming to me for guidance and encouragement. And I had to make sure I was good to go so that I could be there for them as well.
Yeah. So everybody was probably leaning on you to more of a leadership role and some guidance.
Yeah, very much so. And so I had to be mentally and spiritually prepared for that while I'm guiding them as well.
What's probably the biggest thing you noticed about soldiers coming back from combat? The biggest problem they face?
I think the biggest problem they face, and I know this was the biggest problem for me, how you could be on the front lines with life and death decisions, and then 2 or 3 days later you're back in the States and everybody wants you to act normal. And you're thinking, a week ago somebody was shooting at me, and today I'm just supposed to go to McDonald's like it's normal. And I know I struggled with that. And I know that my Marines and sailors struggled with that as well. And, it took me a while to admit that I had PTSD and to actually go and get diagnosed. But that was one of the best things I could have ever done, was to go get that official diagnosis, because I was like, I'm a chaplain. I should be able to handle this better. I can't look weak in front of my Marines and sailors. Well, you know what? Going and getting diagnosed and admitting that there were some struggles that I had was probably one of the best things I could have done, because then it gave, even years later, some of my Marines the permission to do the same.
Nice. Can you explain to everyone, to our audience, what is PTSD?
Sure. A lot of people have a good idea with PTSD, but then again, some don't. And PTSD is fear-based trauma. And that's where something happens to you from the outside in. Okay. And it might be a natural disaster. It might be a man-made disaster like war. Uh, it could be someone, someone or a group of individuals doing something to you in one instance or maybe several. And that fear-based trauma causes you to have some emotional instability. And that may be where you are anxious. You may get easily angered. You may have a fear of lack of safety, or you're hyper vigilant. You're always waiting for that next thing to have. You may be a little paranoid. You may be distrustful of people because of what happened to you. You may be afraid that people aren't exactly what they seem to be. And so you're distrustful. You may even be distrustful of yourself because you may not trust the decisions that you made before the incident that happened that gave you the PTSD. For myself, after being in a few firefights, and especially after that first firefight that I was in, it was hard for me to turn my back on people because I was afraid of what might be behind me. And so, when I go to a restaurant, sitting to where I can see all of the exits and sitting to where I can see the majority of the people in the restaurant so nobody could come up behind me, or maybe being hyper vigilant to where I'm constantly checking the locks in my house. Those were all things that I had to work through. And also, as many veterans are, when all of a sudden you're startled by loud noises. I don't have an issue with the fireworks of July 4th because I prepare myself for them. But I will tell you something that did happen to me. And, for the first couple of years I came back, it was hard for me to go to any big sporting events, just simply because of being in that large of a crowd was something I hadn't quite worked through yet. And so we were in Tampa, Florida, and I had been assigned to the Coast Guard there because Navy chaplains work with the Coast Guard. And so a friend of mine had gotten us tickets, preseason tickets for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the football team. And my wife and I were very excited to go. We went, we had great seats. And if you've ever seen that stadium, you'll notice that they have a life-size pirate ship at one end of the stadium. And our seats were right in front of the pirate ship. And I did not know that when the Buccaneers scored, you know where I'm going with this. I didn't know that when the Bucs score, that they shoot the cannons on the pirate ship. And so my friend and his girlfriend came over, and as a matter of fact, his brother is actually one of my closest friends in the Navy, and he's a rabbi in the chaplain corps, and we're very close friends. And so he came over to talk to us about our seats, and we were telling him how much we loved him. We weren't paying attention to the game, and the Buccaneers scored, and we're talking, and all of a sudden behind me, the cannons go off. And I had a flashback, and I did not realize it at the time, but I grabbed my wife, I threw her to the ground, and I covered her. And then I realized where I was. And I looked up at my friend, and whose mouth is wide open, and his girlfriend's mouth is wide open. And my wife's like, "What the heck?" And I'm just like, "You know what, guys, I'm sorry. I heard the cannons, I flashed, that's what happened." And he was like, "Josh told me this isn't unexpected." His brother had mentioned that. after, because both of us were in Afghanistan at the same time. And so I was like, yeah, maybe it's about time to just go get some help.
So what did you kind of have to work through to get over your PTSD?
First of all, was normalizing how I was feeling, realizing that how I was feeling, that, excuse me, that lack of security, that hypervigilance, that irritability when people were crowding around me, because even going shopping at Costco at Christmas time, all of the people in there crowding around me, I would start to get a little anxious, and I would just look at my wife, and she would go, "Why don't you go wait out in the truck?" And I was like, "I love you very much." So it was understanding that those are all things that are normal, and then beginning to realize that you can walk forward from that. Just because you might feel broken because of that experience doesn't mean that you have to stay that way. And talking with my counselor and having her just help me walk through that normalcy, and how do you begin then to work through that and understand that what you're going through is just a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. War is not a normal thing. We can call it normal if we want, but having people try to kill you, and for my Marines and sailors having to try to kill others, that's not normal.
What do you think that experience does to your soul?
Couple of different things. For me, oddly enough, it drew me closer to God. As crazy as it may seem, with everything going on around me, all of the chaos, all of the moving about the battle space, because my RP and I, we were outside of the wire 5 days a week. And what I mean by that, because some people may not be familiar with that phrase. So we had a main base of operations, our combat outpost, or COP, that my battalion had built from the ground up. Matter of fact, when we first got there, we actually had to sleep in shallow pits in the ground so that snipers wouldn't shoot us at night. And so we built this COP from the ground up, and it was, once inside the COP, you were relatively safe because we had HESCO barriers up, and so it was very hard for snipers to be able to see into the facility. But that's where the headquarters part of our battalion was. But we had rifle companies that had taken over other areas of our battle space, making sure that the smuggling lines for IEDs to other areas were getting shut down, to make sure that a road was getting hard paved so that we could supply the northern area of our province better. And so I would take one rifle company a week, and my RP and I, we would move about using logistical convoys to get from place to place to minister to our people. And we would, I would provide counseling, I would do worship services, I would encourage, and just doing that. So we were in an unprotected status, easily 5 days a week, and then just coming back to the main combat outpost on the weekends. And as crazy as that was, I felt like I was smack in the middle of where God wanted me to be. With no guarantee of my life. I didn't have the assumption, well, just because I'm a chaplain, I'm going to come through this okay. As a matter of fact, there was an Army chaplain who died shortly before I got to Afghanistan. So But I had to understand that I had to face the same dangers that my Marines and sailors did. And that was where God wanted me to be. And he used me to be able to provide that encouragement to them, when they were going on these patrols every day and having engagements every single day.
Yeah. What's one thing you noticed that kind of your men went through, like soul wise, like spirituality wise, like going through that environment and having to actually kill other people?
Yeah. Well, they realized, for many of them, they realized, hey, tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And maybe I need to get myself right with my creator. So we were having a lot of spiritual discussions about what happens after you die, about maybe if they had a faith when they're younger, but they wanted to reconnect with their faith now. And sometimes that faith wasn't always what I believed. So I would be doing some facilitating, helping them to get connected to maybe somebody who was of their faith group so that they could have those conversations. But that kind of environment helped them to realize, the here and now may not be all there is. I need to be thinking more about what happens after this life. And that was quite often a big topic of conversation.
Nice. So you got to be in the front lines of watching people kind of go through a little conversion process right there in front of you.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And that was a privilege. That was one of those ways where I felt like God had placed me right where he wanted me to be, was to have those conversations and to pray those prayers with people, and even to create, ad hoc baptismals and to do baptisms there in the middle of everything. And I've got a great picture of me doing a baptism there in Afghanistan with this one young corporal who I think now he's either a gunny or a master sergeant. And oddly enough, he's nicknamed Tank because he's about thick as a tank. He's
Nice.
I remember when I was baptizing him, I was thinking, am I going in with him?
You recently wrote a book. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So it kind of all goes back to COVID. So during COVID, I was selected to go to funded graduate education. And so I was selected to go to clinical pastoral education. And what that is when you go to minister in a hospital, whether you're a civilian chaplain or a military chaplain, you need to get certified in clinical pastoral education, where it teaches you how to minister in a clinical environment. And so the Navy had a program in both San Diego and in Hampton Roads where you do a year. You go to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then you do 2 residencies. You do a residency at a naval hospital and a residency with the VA. And so I went to the San Diego program and saw, which was at the height of COVID, I was the ICU chaplain at the Naval Hospital San Diego. And that's where I saw we were losing at least a person a day, sometimes 2. And sometimes we would lose a mother on this month, and 2 or 3 weeks later, her husband would pass. And then we're working with the families, dealing with that grief. I'm working with the medical providers who are just feeling absolutely helpless during that time. And that's when I started to really understand what the concept of moral injury was. And moral injury, different from PTSD, is when we do something, sometime under the orders of someone in authority over us, or maybe we failed to prevent something. Like in this situation, the medical providers were not able to keep these people alive, and they were losing them and feeling absolutely helpless. And so the result of that moral injury is that people just become consumed with guilt and shame, and then come to believe that they are corrupted, maybe infected with evil. I've even heard one person say that my soul is shattered and it feels like I'm rubbing over the glass every day. And so I'm dealing with the medical providers who are really struggling with this and really calling their own skills into question, because they can't save these people because of how this virus was just ravaging at that time. And then when I wrapped up that time with the residency there, I went and did a residency with the VA in San Diego, and they sent me to a very special place. They sent me to a place called the Aspire Center, which is a PTSD domiciliary there in San Diego. And what the Aspire Center does is they take homeless veterans off the streets of San Diego who have been diagnosed with PTSD, and they address their PTSD, they address their moral injury. Quite often, many of them are addicted to substances. They address their addiction and help them to get clean and stay clean. They live at the facility over a period of 6 months. And then as their treatments are progressing and they're showing progress, then they help them to find jobs, and they've helped them to find apartments so that they don't go back out on the streets. And then they can begin moving forward with their lives. And here's what's super awesome there, Ryan. They have an 85% success rate. And it's just phenomenal. And to work with these people, and as a chaplain, to have an equal seat at the table with a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a social worker. And they're saying, chaplain, we want your input into how to help this person. You're not just a secondary voice. You're an equal voice at the table. And the people at that facility love and care for veterans. Just their dedication inspired me. And so hearing their stories of PTSD and moral injury there. Then when I graduated from the program and went to 29 Palms, which if you don't know where 29 Palms is, it's an hour and a half north of Palm Springs, and it's smack in the middle of the Mojave Desert. And it's a Marine Corps training base where they do desert combat warfare. And during the course of a year, they'll have 50,000 people come to the base for training. And it would be Marines, sailors, and people from other militaries will come as well. And as we're there, and after seeing what I had just experienced, and with what I had worked through at the Aspire Center, I went to my leadership and I said, look, why are we waiting until these Marines and sailors are homeless on the streets of San Diego to do something? Why can't we do something here and now? And my leadership at the hospital was like, what do you want to do, chaplain? We've got your back. And so I took a program that the VA had called Building Spiritual Strength, and I tweaked it for active duty, and I partnered with a mental health provider, and we started having 8-week courses with people there on the base who were diagnosed with PTSD, addressing their PTSD and moral injury, and helping them to reconnect with their faith, or maybe choose a faith to connect with, period. Or maybe realize to connect with something that's bigger than themselves, so that they could begin to address those symptoms of PTSD and moral injury, and that reconnection with their faith helps to mitigate that. And we saw just awesome things. And so in working with that, my wife said, maybe you need to go back to school for your doctorate. And I had a very spiritual response to that. I said, but I don't want to go back to school. I just got out of a Navy school. I don't want to go back to school. And, it's just awful when we marry these wise women because you can't argue with them. Of course, you can't argue with women anyway. But anyway, sorry about that. If you get ugly comments about that, I'll just take the heat.
I think it's funny.
But, and so she was like, look, you're in a shore billet. Now's a great time to go ahead and do your doctorate. And so as I pursued my doctorate and I was realizing, chaplains and mental health providers in the military, we know what we're talking about when we talk about PTSD and moral injury. But what about chaplains outside of the military? What about pastors, ministry leaders, communities of faith? Do they know what moral injury is? And as I started to talk to people in the community and beyond, I was realizing they don't. I sat down with my pastor and I said, what's PTSD? And he gave me a pretty good definition. And then I said, what's moral injury? And he gave me a look like a deer in headlights. And then when I explained what moral injury was, he started naming people in the congregation that described. And I said, I don't think you're the only chaplain who probably feels this way. And so my doctoral project was on educating civilian chaplains and local ministers on what moral injury is and how to come alongside these individuals and companion with them to help them walk that path of restoration back so that they don't always have to feel like they're broken.
Yeah, nice. I think a lot of everything comes back to trauma and the spiritual side anyways, with what trauma people go through, which causes maybe some alcohol, drug use, things like that anyways.
I completely agree. And, that alcohol and drug use is all about numbing the effects of the trauma.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this retired gunny at the Aspire Center. And I remember he looked at me and he said, chaps, isn't there just some magic pill where I can just wake up on the other side and be all better? And I said, there really isn't. And the illustration I gave him spoke directly to him. Many people listening to you may not be, but I happen to be the oldest person who has ever gone through the combat obstacle course at Camp Lejeune. And so I did it, I think, when I was 55. There may have been since then somebody older. So what the combat obstacle course does is it's a 5-mile obstacle course, and 80% of it is swamp. And you gotta start at the beginning, and you don't finish until you get through the end. And there's going to be portions of it where you're up to your neck in muck. Period. End of story. You're just wading through the muck. And he had gone through that course. And I said, Gunny, let me ask you a question. Is there any way around the combat obstacle course? And he said, no, the only way is through. And I said, you just answered your own question. The only way of dealing with your trauma is working through it. Getting high isn't going to do it. Getting drunk, passing out isn't going to do it. It just is going to delay how you're feeling about it. But then later, those feelings are going to come right smack back.
Yeah.
And the only way you can do it is wading through the swamp. And then when you come out on the other side, there's meaning in your suffering, and you have a purpose.
Yeah.
And we had to work, because without the Marine Corps, he was struggling with what his purpose was, and and all of that. And that was something we had to work through together. And so as I did that, I got my doctorate, and there was this 200-page dissertation with this program that I had developed and had did with these pastors and with these civilian chaplains. And so the people going through this program were like, you need to write a book. And my dissertation committee, which was made up of a local pastor and a retired Army colonel, they were both like, you need to turn this into a book. Well, of course, you know what I said.
No.
I want to do that. But as I thought about it more and more, I thought, what might be a good way to get this information about moral injury and about how to come alongside these people than to write a very straightforward book, take all of the academic language out of it, and just write a very straightforward book that anybody could understand, whether you graduated from high school or whether you have multiple PhDs. You can walk away from this book and understand what moral injury is and understand how to come alongside someone, give them a safe place to tell their story of trauma, and not just pat them on the back and say, you're good now, but to actually say, let's walk this path together.
Nice. So when is your book being released?
Well, my book was released in February.
Nice. What's the name of it for the audience?
It is named Restoring the Broken, and I was very privileged. It went to #1 on Amazon in 3 different areas, in Christian counseling, in pastoral ministries, and the third one I can't remember to save my life. But I think it was, in Christian resources.
Nice.
And so I was very privileged in that. Matter of fact, I'm working on my second book right now. I'm doing a collaboration book with some friends. And that book is going to be called Between You and God. And it's how we allow different circumstances to become a barrier between us and God and how to overcome them.
Interesting. How can people get a hold of you?
Well, they could get a hold of me through my book website, which I'll make sure you have all of this information. But the website for the book is called Restoring the Broken, www.restoring-the-broken.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I'll make sure that you have the link to my LinkedIn profile. Or you can just simply email me at chapsbrant@yahoo.com. That's CHAPS, B as in boy, RANT @yahoo.com.
Awesome. And I'll drop all that in the show notes for everyone. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
Just a couple of things. Number one is, if you or someone you love feel broken by trauma, you don't have to stay that way. There is a path back of hope and restoration. And the second thing is, and this is something that I learned very quickly when I got to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. It's a big saying in the Marine Corps, and that is bloom where you're planted. And what I mean by bloom where you're planted is, don't always look, there's that old saying that, people see the other side of the fence, they think it's greener. Don't try to look at other situations and say, oh, I wish that was me. Oh, I wish that was me. Look at your situation and make strategic decisions on how to make your situation better. One thing my wife and I do at every duty station we go to, and now as I'm transitioning out of the Navy and becoming a civilian chaplain, whatever duty station we went to, we would always make the decision, we're going to make this the best duty station yet. we're going to get involved in the community. We're going to see things in the area. We're going to get ourselves involved in a local faith community. And if we have some struggles, we're going to work through them together. And that's what we sought to do through our whole marriage, but also through every duty station we had in the military. And now, as I'm exiting the military and honestly going to an area that I avoided my entire military career, was, my entire career, I avoided Washington, D.C. Who hires me as I get out of the Navy? The government in Washington, D.C.
God's got a sense of humor.
God does, so does our government. And so we've made the decision, for a place we've avoided, we're going to adopt it as our own. And you may be in a difficult situation, but you can either choose to complain and shut yourself down, or you can choose to look around and see what you can improve, how you can educate yourself, how you can make yourself better. And you'll do nothing but benefit by doing that. And that's what I mean by bloom where you're planted.
Great advice. Dr. Larry, I can't thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your great story with all of us and insight.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for being willing to have me on, Ryan.
Hey, not a problem. Well, guys, that's going to be all the time we have here today. Remember, the only way to get what you want is go through the fire.
Amen.